I put on my pearl earrings, the ones Harold had given me for our 30th anniversary. Not that anyone would notice them, but they made me feel put together. The invitation to my grandson Austin's graduation ceremony sat on my dresser, its gold embossed lettering catching the morning light. 3 weeks ago, when Scott had called to invite me, his voice had that forced cheerfulness I'd grown to recognize. Mom, Austin's graduating next month. Top of his class. We'd really like you to come. I'd waited for the second part, the part that usually followed such invitations. The could you or would you mind that inevitably came after. But this time, there was nothing. Just the invitation. Clean and simple. For the first time in years, I felt a flutter of genuine excitement. Maybe things were changing. Maybe I was finally being included because they wanted me there, not because they needed something. I smoothed my navy dress, bought specially for the occasion, and checked my reflection one last time. At 73, I still took pride in my appearance. My silver hair was neatly styled, my makeup subtle but present. I wanted to look my best for Austin. He'd always been a good boy, even if our relationship had grown distant over the years. Not his fault, really. Children follow their parents' lead, and Scott and Tiffany had never made family connections a priority. The taxi arrived at exactly 9 o'clock. I'd insisted on arranging my own transportation to the university, despite Scott's half-hearted offer to pick me up. We'll be running around crazy that morning, Mom, he'd said. Might be easier if you just meet us there. Translation, you're not important enough to rearrange our schedule for. But today, I chose not to dwell on that. Today was about Austin, about celebrating his achievement. I'd been saving for his graduation gift for over a year, an envelope containing enough for a down payment on his first apartment after college. It wasn't just money, it was freedom, options, a start in life without the burden asking his parents for help. The university campus was crowded with families by the time I arrived. Mothers in floral dresses, fathers in ties they rarely wore, siblings fidgeting in their Sunday best. I scanned the crowd for my family, finally spotting Scott near the entrance to the auditorium. He was taller than most, with the same sandy hair that was now peppered with gray. Mom, he said when he saw me, giving me a quick, perfunctory hug. You made it. I wouldn't miss it, I replied, smiling past the hollowness of his greeting. Where's Tiffany? And Haley? Already inside, saving seats. We should head in. I followed him through the sea of people, clutching my purse with the precious envelope inside. The auditorium was massive, with rows upon rows of seats facing a stage decorated with the university colors. Scott led me down an aisle, then stopped at a row where Tiffany and Haley were already seated. Oh, Mom, Scott said, suddenly hesitant. We only managed to save 4 seats together in the front section for the family. But we found you a spot just a few rows back. He pointed to a seat at the end of a row, at least 10 rows behind them. I felt my smile freeze on my face. Oh, I see. It's actually a better view from back there, Tiffany chimed in, not quite meeting my eyes. She looked polished as always, her blonde hair falling in perfect waves, her jewelry catching the light. The angle to the stage is better. Of course, I said, my voice steady even as something inside me shriveled. That's fine. Great, thanks for understanding. Scott seemed relieved, already turning away. We'll catch up after the ceremony. I made my way to my assigned seat, alone among strangers. The family next to me smiled politely before returning to their excited chatter. From my position, I could just make out the backs of Scott, Tiffany, and Haley's heads. 10 rows ahead, I watched as Tiffany's parents arrived and were immediately ushered to the seats beside them in the family section. The seats that should have included me. The ceremony began with the usual pomp and circumstance. I craned my neck to see Austin as he walked across the stage, tall and handsome in his cap and gown. I clapped until my hands hurt, even though no one who mattered would notice my enthusiasm from where I sat. When he moved his tassel from right to left, I felt tears well up in my eyes, not just pride for my grandson, but a strange mourning for the grandmother I'd never really been allowed to be. After the ceremony, I pushed through the crowd, searching for my family. I finally spotted them in the courtyard, posing for pictures. Austin in the center, flanked by his parents, his sister, and Tiffany's parents. They smiled for the photographer. A perfect family portrait. "Excuse me," I said, approaching them after the photographer lowered his camera. "Congratulations, Austin. I'm so proud of you." Austin's face lit up, seemingly genuinely pleased to see me. "Grandma, you came." He broke away from the group to give me a proper hug, the kind I hadn't received in years. "Of course I did," I said, holding him tight for a moment. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." "We're taking family photos," Tiffany said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "We're on a bit of a schedule with the photographer." "I'd love to be in one, if that's all right," I said, trying to keep my voice light. There was an awkward pause. Scott cleared his throat. "Sure, Mom. We can do one with you too." "One with me too." Not with me as part of the family, but as an addition, an afterthought. The photographer positioned me next to Austin, on the edge of the group. I smiled as genuinely as I could, trying to ignore the subtle body language of everyone shifting slightly away from me, as if I were a stranger who had wandered into their perfect family portrait. "We've got dinner reservations at the Capitol Grill," Scott announced after the photos were done. "Mom, you're welcome to join us." "Of course." "Thank you," I said. "I'd love to." The restaurant was elegant, with dark wood paneling and crisp white tablecloths. I found myself seated at the far end of the long table, next to Haley and across from Austin's roommate, who had been invited at the last minute. From my position, I could barely hear the conversations happening at the other end, where Scott, Tiffany, and Tiffany's parents dominated the discussion. I tried to engage with Haley, my 20-year-old granddaughter, but she was distracted by her phone, occasionally looking up to offer a brief response before returning to whatever was happening on her screen. The roommate was polite but clearly uncomfortable, probably wondering who the old lady at the end of the table was. "So, Austin," Tiffany's father called out, raising his glass. "Harvard Law School, following in your grandfather's footsteps. We couldn't be prouder." Austin beamed, and everyone lifted their glasses in a toast. I raised mine too, though no one seemed to notice. "Actually," I said, perhaps a bit too loudly, "Austin gets his intelligence from both sides of the family. His grandfather, my Herald, graduated summa cum laude from Columbia." There was a brief, uncomfortable silence. "Right," Scott said quickly. "Anyway, to Austin and Harvard Law." The conversation moved on, as if I hadn't spoken. I sat quietly, picking at my overcooked salmon, wondering why I had even bothered to come. After dinner, as everyone was preparing to leave, I approached Austin with my envelope. "I have something for you," I said, pressing it into his hands. "A little graduation gift to help with your new start." Austin opened it, his eyes widening as he saw the check inside. "Grandma, this is too much." "It's exactly right," I said firmly. "You deserve it." "Thanks, Grandma." He hugged me again, and for a moment I felt that flutter of connection, of being valued. Then Tiffany called him over to say goodbye to her parents, and the moment was gone. Scott approached me as I was putting on my coat. "Mom, why don't you stay with us tonight? It's late to be heading back to your place." I almost agreed out of habit, that deeply ingrained need to be accommodating, to not cause trouble, but something held me back. "I think I'll head to my hotel. I've already checked in, and all my things are there." He looked surprised. "Hotel? You didn't need to get a hotel? We have the guest room." "I thought it would be easier for everyone," I said simply. "I'll come by the house tomorrow before heading home." The taxi ride to the hotel was quiet. I watched the city lights blur past the window, thinking about the day's events, the separate seating, the family photos, the dinner table arrangement. None of it was overtly cruel, just 1,000 tiny cuts that left me bleeding invisibly. At the hotel, I changed into my nightgown and sat on the edge of the bed. I took out my phone and, against my better judgment, opened the social media app that Haley had insisted I join to keep up with the family. I rarely posted anything myself, but I did check it occasionally to see photos of my grandchildren. There it was, Already, Tiffany had posted photos from the graduation. So proud of our Harvard-bound son. Perfect day celebrating with family. The images showed Scott, Tiffany, Austin, Haley, and Tiffany's parents in various combinations. Not a single photo included me. It was as if I hadn't even been there. I set the phone down, my hands trembling slightly. Then I did something I rarely allowed myself to do. I cried. Not loud, heaving sobs, but quiet tears that traced pathways down my cheeks. I cried for the grandmother I'd never been allowed to be, for the family that saw me as an obligation rather than a beloved member, for the decades I'd spent pretending not to notice my own erasure. As I lay in the unfamiliar hotel bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but wonder what tomorrow would bring. Scott and Tiffany had invited me to stop by before I headed home. What exactly did that mean? Would there be yet another uncomfortable interaction? Another reminder that I was separate, apart, not really one of them? Or was there perhaps something else behind the invitation? Something they wanted from me? After all, it wouldn't be the first time my presence was requested for reasons beyond simple family connection. The bedside alarm clock read 2:17 a.m. when I finally drifted off, my mind still churning with questions that had no easy answers. The next morning arrived with sunlight streaming through the hotel curtains I'd forgotten to close completely. I dressed carefully in slacks and a light blue blouse, determined to maintain my dignity regardless of what the day might bring. At Scott and Tiffany's house, I knocked on the door, noting the luxury vehicles in the driveway, tangible evidence of their success I'd helped make possible with years of financial support. Tiffany answered, her smile professional rather than warm. "Vivian, good morning. Come in, we're just having coffee." The house was impeccable as always, decorated in the modern farmhouse style that Tiffany favored. Family photos lined the hallway, Austin's sports achievements, Haley's dance recitals, family vacations to destinations I'd only heard about afterward. I was absent from these visual records of family history, save for one small photo taken at Austin's 5th birthday party, before Tiffany had fully taken control of the family narrative. In the kitchen, Scott sat reading something on his tablet. He looked up briefly. "Morning, Mom. Sleep well?" "Well enough," I replied, accepting the coffee Tiffany offered. "Where are the kids?" "Austin's still sleeping in," Scott said. "Late night with his friends, and Haley had an early yoga class." I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment. I'd hoped to say a proper goodbye to my grandchildren. "Actually, Mom," Scott began, setting his tablet aside, "there's something we wanted to talk to you about." There it was. I took a sip of coffee, steeling myself. "Oh, we were wondering about Grandma Sullivan's jewelry collection," Tiffany said, her voice carefully casual. "You mentioned once that you might pass some pieces down, with Austin going to Harvard and eventually getting established, and Haley likely to get engaged in the next few years. We thought it might be time to discuss how you want to handle the family heirloom," Scott finished. "My mother's jewelry collection. Pieces dating back generations, some with significant monetary value, others with priceless sentimental worth. I'd always planned to pass them down, of course, but the calculation behind this request was suddenly, painfully clear." "I see," I said slowly. "So that's why I was invited to the graduation." Scott's expression shifted to confusion, then defensiveness. "What? No, Mom, that's please," I interrupted, setting my coffee down. "Let's not pretend. I heard you and Tiffany talking last night. In the guest room, the walls are thin." Their faces fell, caught in the act. "Last night, after returning from dinner, I'd gone to use the bathroom attached to the guest room. Through the wall, I'd heard their voices clearly. 'Well, Mom's here now,' Scott had said. 'You need to ask her about the jewelry before she leaves.' "I know," Tiffany had replied. "It's just awkward. But with Austin going to Harvard and the expenses coming up, and you know Haley's serious about Chad, those pieces could really help. Just bring it up, casually. She's always been generous, and it's not like she wears most of it anyway." I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but their voices had carried, and once I started listening, I couldn't stop. It was like watching a car accident in slow motion, horrifying, but impossible to look away from. Now, sitting in their perfect kitchen, I watched the realization dawn on their faces. I had heard them. I knew the truth. Mom, Scott began, his tone conciliatory. It's not like that. We wanted you at the graduation because you're family. The jewelry is just practical planning for the future. Practical planning. I repeated. Is that what family means to you now? Practical arrangements and asset distribution? Tiffany shifted uncomfortably. Vivian, you're overreacting. We're just trying to be organized about family heirlooms. It's perfectly normal to discuss these things. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw for the first time the calculating woman my son had married. Beautiful, polished, and utterly focused on acquisition. Then I looked at Scott, the boy I'd raised, the man I barely recognized, who had allowed himself to become a co-conspirator in my systematic erasure from the family. I should go, I said, standing up. I have a long drive home. Mom, don't be like this, Scott protested, following me as I walked toward the door. You're making this into something it's not. I turned to face him. What am I making it into, Scott? Tell me, what exactly am I to you now? Because it seems like I'm not much more than a safety deposit box you check on occasionally. His face flushed. That's not fair. Isn't it? When was the last time you called me just to talk? When was the last time you included me in a family event without an ulterior motive? When was the last time you remembered that I'm a person, not just your mother? The silence that followed was deafening. I could see him struggling to come up with examples. Proof that I was wrong, but there was nothing. I'm going home, I said finally. Please tell Austin and Haley I said goodbye. As I walked to my car, I felt strangely light, as if a weight I'd been carrying for years had finally been set down. The tears didn't come this time. Instead, there was a clarity, sharp and clean as winter air. I had been blind for so long, willfully ignoring what was right in front of me. But now I saw the truth, and once seen, it couldn't be unseen. The road ahead stretched out before me, lonely perhaps, but honest in a way my family relationships hadn't been for years. I didn't know yet what I would do about my mother's jewelry, or about Scott, or any of it. But for the first time in a long time, I was certain of one thing. I deserved better, and perhaps it was finally time to demand it. The drive home took 3 hours, giving me plenty of time to think. Rain started falling about halfway through, matching my mood but also washing everything clean. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had moved beyond sadness into something approaching resolve. My house, the same one where I'd raised Scott, where Harold and I had built our life together, welcomed me with its familiar comfort. I'd lived here alone since Harold passed 7 years ago, refusing Scott's occasional suggestions that I sell it and move into something more manageable. This house was mine. My history lived in these walls. Inside, I set my suitcase down and walked through the rooms, seeing them with new eyes. The dining room where we'd hosted countless family dinners, the living room where Scott had opened Christmas presents as a child, the study where Harold had helped him with homework. Memories lived here, but they were memories of a family that no longer existed. I went to my bedroom and opened the closet, reaching for the step stool to access the high shelf where I kept my mother's jewelry box. It was heavy, inlaid with mother of pearl, a beautiful antique in its own right. I set it on the bed and opened it carefully. Inside lay the pieces my mother had left me, her engagement ring with its modest diamond, the pearl necklace she'd worn at her wedding, the ruby earrings my father had given her on their 25th anniversary, and more. Some were valuable, others merely sentimental, but all carried the weight of history, of women who had come before me. I ran my fingers over the pieces, remembering my mother wearing them, remembering her hands. So similar to mine now, she had given them to me with joy, not as a transaction, but as a connection, a thread linking generations. How different from the calculating way Scott and Tiffany viewed these same objects. The phone rang, startling me. Scott's name appeared on the caller ID. I let it go to voicemail. He called again immediately. Again, I didn't answer. On the third call, I finally picked up. Mom, he said. his voice tense. You left so suddenly. We were worried. Were you? I asked, my voice calm. That's new. Look, I think we got off on the wrong foot this morning. Tiffany didn't mean to upset you. We just thought it was a good time to discuss future planning. Future planning. Such a clinical term for dismantling my life while I was still living it. I'm not discussing the jewelry right now, Scott, I said firmly, or any other future planning. That's not why I'm calling, he protested, though his tone suggested otherwise. I just wanted to make sure you got home okay. The weather looked bad. I'm fine. The house is fine. Everything is fine. There was a pause. Mom, are you angry with me? The question was so guileless, so oblivious, that I almost laughed. I'm not angry, Scott. I'm seeing clearly for the first time in years. There's a difference. What does that mean? It means I need some time. Time to think, time to reevaluate. I'll call you when I'm ready. But, goodbye, Scott. I hung up. Something I'd never done before. My hands trembled slightly, but not from guilt or anxiety, from the strange, exhilarating feeling of setting a boundary. I returned to the jewelry box, closing it carefully and returning it to its shelf. Those decisions could wait. For now, I had more immediate concerns. I went to my study, the small room that had been Harold's domain when he was alive, and had become mine in the years since. The desk was neat, organized, with files labeled in my precise handwriting. I pulled out the one marked financial and began reviewing its contents. What I found wasn't surprising. I'd known it somewhere in the back of my mind, but seeing it laid out was still jarring. Over the past 7 years, I had given Scott and his family over $130,000, college funds for the grandchildren, a loan for their kitchen renovation that was never repaid, money for Tiffany's wellness business that had failed within a year, the down payment for their current house, ostensibly a loan but with no repayment plan ever discussed, and smaller amounts, countless smaller amounts, that had flowed steadily from my accounts to theirs. I'd been supporting them, subsidizing their lifestyle, enabling them to appear more successful than they actually were. And in return, I'd received what? Obligation visits? Performative gratitude? A seat at the back of the auditorium? The next day, I made an appointment with my financial advisor, James. He'd been handling my investments since Harold died, and I trusted his judgment. His office was in a modest building downtown. Nothing flashy, which was one of the reasons Harold had chosen him in the first place. Vivian, he greeted me, rising from behind his desk. Good to see you. It's been a while. Too long, I agreed, settling into the chair across from him. I need to make some changes, James. What kind of changes? I want to stop the automatic transfers to Scott's accounts. All of them. And I want to review my will and any other financial arrangements involving my family. James's eyebrows rose slightly, but he didn't ask for explanations. That was another reason I liked him. He was discreet. We can certainly do that. May I ask if this is a temporary measure or a permanent change? Permanent, I said firmly. It's time for Scott to stand on his own 2 feet. He's 45 years old, for heaven's sake. James nodded, making notes. And your will? Currently, it leaves most of your estate to Scott, with specific bequests to Austin and Haley for education. I want to change that too. I need to think about exactly how, but I know I want more control, more conditions. A trust might be appropriate, James suggested. It would give you more oversight in how your assets are used after you're gone. Yes, that sounds right. And James, there's one more thing. I'd like to set up a separate account for my granddaughter Haley, something she can access directly when she turns 25 without going through her parents. James looked up from his notes. May I ask why? I hesitated. It was hard to articulate my feelings about Haley. Unlike Austin, who had always been the golden child, Haley seemed to struggle more with school, with fitting into the perfect family image Tiffany cultivated, with finding her own path. There was a sensitivity to her, a quietness that reminded me of myself at that age, and I'd seen moments, brief but real, when she seemed to actually see me, to recognize me as a person rather than just grandma. I think she might need options someday, I said finally. Independence, her own choices. James nodded, understanding without needing the details. We can arrange that. Let me outline some options for you. For the next hour, we discussed trusts and conditions, investments and allocations. By the time I left his office, I had a plan. Not just a financial plan, but the beginnings of a new way forward. I felt empowered in a way I hadn't in years. This wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about reclaiming my agency, my dignity, my self-respect. As I drove home, I realized I was hungry. Genuinely hungry, not just aware that it was time to eat. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt that. On impulse, I stopped at a small cafe I'd driven past hundreds of times, but never entered. Inside, it was cozy and warm, with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. I ordered a sandwich and soup, and sat by the window watching people pass by. The food was delicious, hearty and fresh. Nothing fancy, but made with care. As I ate, I noticed a flyer on the community bulletin board near my table. Silver Stars, a social group for active seniors. Games, outings, friendships, all welcome. Below was a list of activities: book clubs, walking groups, theater outings, even dance classes. I'd never joined anything like that before. Harold had been my social life, and after he died, I'd retreated into my role as mother and grandmother, as if that were enough. But was it enough? The question lingered as I finished my meal and drove home. My house felt different when I entered it this time. Not just quiet, but waiting, as if it too were ready for something new. That evening, I sat on my porch with a glass of wine, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. My phone remained silent. No calls from Scott, no texts asking for money or favors disguised as family connection. The silence should have felt lonely, but instead it felt like possibility. Tomorrow, I decided I would call the number on that flyer. I would join a book club or a walking group. I would begin to build a life that didn't revolve around being needed by people who didn't truly see me. The wine tasted better than usual that night, rich and complex on my tongue. Or perhaps I was simply more present, more aware of the moment. Either way, as darkness fell and the first stars appeared, I made a promise to myself. This was just the beginning. The story of my life wasn't over. A new chapter was starting, and this time, I would be the author. The book club met on Thursday evenings at the public library, a beautiful old building with high ceilings and tall windows. I arrived early, nervously clutching my copy of the month's selection, a novel about a woman who walks away from her life and starts over in a small coastal town. The irony wasn't lost on me. The group consisted of 8 women and 2 men, all around my age or older. They welcomed me warmly, making space in their circle, asking questions but not prying. By the end of the evening, I had laughed more than I had in months. Margaret, a retired English teacher with a wicked sense of humor, invited me to join their Saturday morning walking group as well. Nothing strenuous, she assured me. Just a stroll through the park, followed by coffee and complaining about our adult children. I smiled. That sounds perfect. That night, I slept deeply and dreamlessly for the first time since the graduation. When I woke, I felt refreshed, energized. I spent the morning cleaning out my closet, filling bags with clothes I hadn't worn in years, making space metaphorically and literally. Around noon, my phone rang. It was Haley. "Grandma?" Her voice sounded small, uncertain. "Are you okay? Dad said you were upset." "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "Better than fine, actually." "Go. Good." There was a pause. "I'm sorry I didn't get to say goodbye after the graduation. I didn't know you were leaving so early." "It's all right. How are you doing? Your summer class is starting soon." "Yeah, next week." Another pause. "Dad and Mom are acting weird. They keep talking about finances and budgets. Did something happen?" I considered how to answer. Haley was 20, not a child. but still caught in the middle of whatever narrative Scott and Tiffany were spinning. I'm making some changes, I said carefully. Nothing for you to worry about. Are you, are you okay for money, Grandma? Because if you need help. Oh, Haley, I couldn't help laughing. I'm fine financially, more than fine. That's not what this is about. Then what is it about? Her question was direct, genuinely curious. I took a deep breath. It's about respect, I suppose, about being seen as a person, not just as a resource. The line went quiet for a moment. Then, to my surprise, Haley said, I think I understand that. Something in her tone made me wonder if she felt the same way sometimes, valued for what she could provide, good grades, the right friends, the appropriate extracurriculars, rather than for who she was. Would you like to visit sometime? I asked impulsively. Just you. We could go shopping, see a movie, whatever you'd like. Really? She sounded surprised but pleased. Yeah, I'd like that. Maybe in a couple of weeks after my first exam? Perfect. Just let me know when. After we hung up, I sat holding the phone, feeling a warm glow of connection. Perhaps there was hope for at least one genuine relationship in this family. The walking group on Saturday was even better than the book club. 6 of us met at the park entrance, all dressed in comfortable clothes and sensible shoes. We walked at a leisurely pace, talking and laughing, stopping occasionally to admire flowers or watch ducks on the pond. Afterward, we went to a nearby cafe for coffee and pastries. The conversation flowed easily, touching on books, politics, local events, and yes, our adult children. I was surprised by how readily the others shared their frustrations and disappointments. The daughter who only called when she needed babysitting, the son who had moved across the country and rarely visited, the grandchildren who were too busy with activities to spend time with grandparents. My son acts like I'm already half dead, Margaret commented, stirring her coffee. He keeps asking about my arrangements and whether I'm planning for the future, as if the only thing left for me to do is die conveniently and leave him my house. The others nodded in understanding. I felt a strange relief, realizing I wasn't alone in my experiences. What about you, Vivian? Asked Eleanor, a slender woman with striking silver hair. Do your children treat you like you're still alive? I smiled at her directness. My son just discovered that my ATM card no longer works for him, so I'd say he's suddenly very aware that I'm still here and making decisions. They laughed, and Margaret raised her cup in a toast. To making decisions. May we keep doing it until they pry the power of attorney from our cold, dead hands. Here's to that. I agreed, lifting my own cup. And to new friends who understand. The days began to take on a new rhythm. Mornings in the garden, afternoons reading or volunteering at the local literacy center, evenings with my new friends or peaceful solitude at home. I started taking a watercolor class at the community center, something I'd always wanted to try but never made time for. My first attempts were abysmal, but I found I didn't care. The process itself was soothing, absorbing, fulfilling in a way I hadn't expected. Scott called occasionally, his messages becoming increasingly direct about financial matters as it became clear I wasn't going to raise the subject. Mom, Austin's tuition bill came, and I was wondering if you were planning to help with that like we discussed last year. I don't recall making any specific commitment, Scott, I replied calmly. And given Austin's scholarship and your own resources, I'm sure you'll manage. But Mom, Harvard is expensive, and with the economy the way it is. Scott, I interrupted gently, you and Tiffany make over $300,000 a year combined. Austin has a partial scholarship. You have a sizable investment portfolio. You'll be fine. The silence on the other end was telling. How do you know about our finances? He finally asked, his tone defensive. I've been paying attention, I said simply. Just because I've been generous doesn't mean I've been oblivious. After that conversation, his calls became less frequent, more formal. I felt a twinge of sadness, but pushed it aside. This was necessary. This recalibration of our relationship. If there was ever to be anything genuine between us again, it had to be built on reality. not on a financial arrangement disguised as family ties. Haley's visit was scheduled for a weekend in July. I prepared the guest room with fresh linens and flowers, stocked the refrigerator with her favorite foods, and even bought tickets for a show at the local theater. I was nervous, I realized, genuinely invested in making this time together special. She arrived on Friday afternoon, driving herself in the used car she'd bought with her own savings from summer jobs. It was a sensible choice, not the luxury vehicle I might have expected Scott and Tiffany to push for. Another small indication that Haley might be forging her own path. "Grandma," she called, hugging me tightly on the porch. "Your garden looks amazing." "Thank you, sweetheart. I've been spending more time out there lately." Come in, come in. You must be tired after the drive." Inside, Haley looked around with curious eyes, as if seeing the house for the first time. "It looks different somehow." "I've been making some changes," I explained, leading her to the kitchen where I had lemonade waiting, rearranging furniture, sorting through things. "It feels lighter," she decided, accepting a glass. "More like you, if that makes sense." I smiled, touched by her perception. "That's exactly what I've been going for. Now tell me about your summer classes. How's that psychology course you were excited about?" For the next hour, we sat at the kitchen table while Haley talked about her studies, her friends, her thoughts about possibly switching her major from business, Tiffany's choice, to psychology, her own interest. I listened intently, asking questions, offering observations but not advice. It struck me that this might be the first real conversation we'd ever had as adults. That evening, we went to dinner at a small Italian restaurant downtown. Over pasta and wine, just one glass, for Haley, who was driving, our conversation turned to family. "Dad's been weird lately," Haley said, twirling spaghetti around her fork. "Stressed about money, which is strange because they just bought that new SUV. Your father has always had complicated feelings about money," I said carefully. "Success is very important to him, or at least the appearance of success." Haley nodded, looking thoughtful. "Mom's the same way. Everything has to look perfect, even when it's not." She hesitated, then added, "I always thought we were really well off, but sometimes I overhear things, like they're worried about bills or loans. It doesn't make sense with the way we live." I took a sip of my wine, considering how much to share. "Many people live beyond their means, Haley. They buy things they can't afford to create an impression of wealth and success. Is that what Mom and Dad do?" Her question was direct, her eyes searching mine. "I think they've made certain choices," I said diplomatically. "Choices that prioritize appearance over financial security sometimes. And you've been helping them." It wasn't a question. I looked at her in surprise. "What makes you say that?" She shrugged, suddenly looking older than her 20 years. "Little things. Comments Mom makes when she thinks I'm not listening. The way Dad always calls you before big expenses come up. How they suddenly started talking about budgets right after you left early from graduation weekend." My clever granddaughter had been paying attention. "Yes," I admitted. "I've helped over the years. Quite a lot, actually. But I've recently decided that needs to change." Haley was quiet for a moment, absently pushing pasta around her plate. "Is that why they're so upset? Because you're not giving them money anymore?" "I think they're adjusting to a new reality," I said carefully. "One where they need to live within their actual means." She nodded slowly. "That's why they've been talking about selling the lake house, and why Mom suddenly decided her yoga retreat with her friends was too extravagant." I felt a twinge of guilt, quickly followed by resolve. "Your parents aren't poor, Haley. They're just learning to be more realistic about their finances." "Good," she said with unexpected firmness. "They always made it seem like money just appeared, like success was this magical thing that happened if you just believed in yourself enough and bought the right stuff." She looked up at me, her expression serious. "I don't want to be like that." Pride swelled in my chest. "You won't be. You're already showing more wisdom than many people twice your age." After dinner, we walked through the downtown area. window shopping, and talking easily. Haley pointed out clothing she liked, artwork that caught her eye, her taste refreshingly distinct from Tiffany's carefully curated aesthetic. We stopped for ice cream cones and sat on a bench in the town square, watching families with young children playing by the fountain. Grandma, Haley said suddenly, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Are you lonely? Living by yourself, I mean. The question caught me off guard. I was, I admitted after a moment. For a long time after your grandfather died, and even after that. But recently, not so much. I've been making new friends, trying new things. It's different, but not lonely. That's good. She licked her ice cream thoughtfully. I worry about that sometimes. Being alone. There's a difference between being alone and being lonely, I said gently. Sometimes being with the wrong people can be much lonelier than being by yourself. She nodded, seeming to absorb this. I think I get that. Sometimes when I'm at home, even with everyone around, I feel invisible. The word struck a chord deep within me. Invisible. Exactly how I'd felt at the graduation, at countless family gatherings, in the narrative Scott and Tiffany had constructed. I understand that feeling very well, I told her. But Haley, I want you to know something important. You are never invisible to me. I see you, your kindness, your intelligence, your sensitivity, all the things that make you who you are. Her eyes welled with tears, and for a moment I feared I'd said too much. Then she leaned against my shoulder, just as she had as a little girl. Thanks, Grandma. I see you too. Those simple words, I see you too, felt like a balm to years of invisible wounds. We finished our ice cream in comfortable silence, connected by understanding that went beyond words. The weekend continued in this vein: shopping, meals together, conversations that ranged from lighthearted to profound. On Saturday night, we attended the theater performance I'd bought tickets for, a production of Our Town that left us both reflected. Sunday morning, I taught Haley how to make my mother's special pancakes, a recipe I'd never shared with Tiffany despite her hints. As Haley was preparing to leave Sunday afternoon, she hugged me tightly. This was the best weekend I've had in ages, Grandma. Can we do it again? Anytime, I promised. My door is always open to you. After she drove away, I sat on the porch, feeling a contentment I hadn't experienced in years. Whatever happened with Scott and Tiffany, I now had the beginnings of a genuine relationship with my granddaughter. One based on mutual respect and recognition, not obligation or utility. Monday morning, I woke with renewed purpose. I'd been thinking about my mother's jewelry collection ever since the confrontation with Scott and Tiffany. What had once seemed like a burden, deciding who should get what, now felt like an opportunity to express my values, to make meaningful connections across generations. I spent the morning sorting through the collection, piece by piece. The diamond earrings my father had given my mother on their 40th anniversary, the cameo brooch that had belonged to my grandmother, the strand of pearls my mother had worn at my wedding. Each item carried stories, memories, connections to the women who had worn them before me. By lunchtime, I had made my decisions. Certain pieces would go to Haley directly, not through Scott and Tiffany, when she turned 25. The same for Austin, though I wasn't yet sure if he would appreciate their significance. Some pieces I would keep wearing myself. I was still very much alive after all. And a few special items I would donate to the Historical Society Museum, where they could be displayed with the stories of the women who had worn them. As I was carefully returning the jewelry to its box, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment I considered not answering. But curiosity got the better of me. Through the peephole, I saw Tiffany standing on my porch, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore jeans instead of her usual perfectly coordinated outfit. I opened the door, keeping my expression neutral. Tiffany, this is unexpected. Can I come in? She asked, her voice lacking its usual confidence. I need to talk to you. I hesitated, then stepped aside. Of course. In the living room, she perched on the edge of the sofa, declining my offer of tea. I sat across from her, waiting. I know Scott has been calling you about Austin's tuition, she began. He told me you've decided not to help this year. That's correct, I said calmly. Vivian, I don't think you understand. We've already committed to Harvard. We can't back out now. It would devastate Austin. I'm not asking you to back out, I clarified. I'm simply saying that you and Scott need to handle the expenses yourselves. You have the resources. She flushed. Our finances are complicated right now. The market downturn affected Scott's bonus, and my business is still in the investment phase. We were counting on your help. You were assuming my help, I corrected, without discussing it with me, just as you've been doing for years. Tiffany's composure cracked slightly. Is this about the graduation? Because I already apologized for the seating mix-up. This isn't about any one incident, Tiffany. It's about a pattern that's been building for years. A pattern where I'm valued for what I can provide, not for who I am. She looked genuinely confused. But we do value you, your family. Am I? Because it doesn't feel that way. It feels like I'm an ATM with a grandmother costume. Her eyes widened at my bluntness. That's not fair. We've always included you in family events. Included me? I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped. Tiffany, at Austin's graduation, you seated me 10 rows behind the family. Not a single photo you posted included me. At dinner, I was placed at the far end of the table with Austin's roommate. And the next morning, the only reason you wanted to talk to me was to ask about my mother's jewelry. She opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again, apparently reconsidering. I didn't. We didn't mean to make you feel that way. Perhaps not consciously, I allowed. But the effect was the same. Tiffany was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. What do you want from us, Vivian? The question surprised me. What did I want? I had been so focused on what I didn't want to be used, to be invisible, to be taken for granted, that I hadn't fully articulated what I did want. I want to be seen, I said finally, recognized as a person with thoughts and feelings and value beyond my checkbook. I want genuine connection, not performance. I want honesty, not manipulation. Tiffany looked down at her hands. I don't know if Scott and I know how to do that, she admitted, her voice barely audible. Our whole life is performance. The admission was startling in its candor. For the first time, I glimpsed the real Tiffany beneath the perfect facade, insecure, struggling, trapped in the image she'd created. Then perhaps it's time to learn, I suggested, my tone gentler, for your sake as much as mine. That kind of performance is exhausting to maintain. She nodded slowly. It is. Then she looked up, a trace of her usual calculation returning. But about Austin's tuition, my decision stands, I said firmly. You and Scott need to figure this out yourselves. It's not that you can't afford it, it's that you've been living beyond your means and using me as a safety net. That stops now. Tiffany stood, straightening her shoulders. I understand. I'll talk to Scott about adjustments we can make. As I showed her to the door, she paused on the threshold. Haley said she had a good time this weekend. I did too, I said simply. She's welcome anytime. After Tiffany left, I sat in my living room, turning our conversation over in my mind. It had been different than I expected. More honest, less combative. Whether anything would truly change remained to be seen, but at least the pretense had been momentarily set aside. That evening, I called my lawyer and scheduled an appointment to formalize the changes to my will and to set up the trust for Haley. As I hung up, I felt a profound sense of alignment, my actions now matching my values, my resources flowing toward what truly mattered to me. Later, as I prepared for bed, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me seemed different somehow, standing straighter, eyes clearer, more present in her own skin. I smiled at her. This new version of myself who was learning to be visible again, not just to others but to herself. The journey ahead might not be easy, but it was undeniably mine, and for now, that was enough. The days stretched into weeks. summer heat giving way to the first hints of fall. My new routines became comfortable, sustaining: book club on Thursdays, walking group on Saturdays, watercolor class on Tuesday afternoons. I volunteered at the Literacy Center twice a week, helping adults learn to read, work that felt meaningful in ways writing checks never had. Scott called less frequently, and when he did, our conversations were stilted, formal. Haley, on the other hand, called regularly and visited again in August. She brought her portfolio from her photography class, proudly showing me images that revealed her unique perspective on the world. One photo particularly moved me: an elderly woman sitting alone on a park bench, her face turned toward the sun, a small smile playing on her lips. There was solitude in the image, but not loneliness, peace, rather than abandonment. That's exactly how I feel these days, I told Haley, pointing to the photo. Alone but not lonely, finding warmth even in solitude. She beamed at my understanding. That's exactly what I was trying to capture. Austin remained distant, too caught up in preparing for Harvard to make time for his grandmother. I sent him a card with a modest check for books. Not enough to solve any real financial problems, just a grandmother's typical gift. The thank you note I received in return was polite, but impersonal, clearly written out of obligation rather than genuine gratitude. In September, I received an unexpected phone call from Tiffany. "Vivian," she began, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "I'm calling because, well, Scott doesn't know I'm calling, but I wanted to let you know we've made some changes." "What kind of changes?" I asked, curious despite myself. "Financial ones. Mainly, we've sold the lake house, and I've gone back to work, real work, not another entrepreneurial venture, a job with health insurance and a steady paycheck." She paused. "It's been an adjustment, but it's also been good in a way. More honest." "I'm glad to hear that," I said, meaning it. "How is Scott handling these changes?" "It's been harder for him," she admitted. "His identity has been so wrapped up in presenting a certain image. But he's trying. We both are." After we hung up, I sat with mixed emotions: pride that they were making responsible changes, sadness at the distance that remained between me and my son, hope that perhaps, with time and continued honesty, something genuine might be rebuilt. That evening, at book club, we discussed a novel about a woman reconnecting with her estranged daughter. The parallels to my own situation weren't lost on me, and I found myself sharing more than usual about my relationship with Scott. "Family estrangement is more common than people realize," Margaret commented. "My sister and I didn't speak for 12 years. When we finally reconnected, we had to build something entirely new, not try to go back to what we had before." "That makes sense," I said thoughtfully. "The old relationship was built on patterns that didn't work. Why try to resurrect them?" "Exactly. And it took both of us being willing to see each other as we really are now, not as we remembered or wished the other to be." Her words stayed with me for days afterward. Perhaps that was the key: not trying to recover what was lost, but being open to creating something new, something based on reality rather than illusion or expectation. October brought cooler temperatures and vibrant foliage. I spent more time in my garden, preparing it for winter, finding satisfaction in the rhythm of the seasons, the necessary letting go that precedes new growth. One crisp afternoon, as I was cutting back perennials, a car pulled into my driveway. Scott's car. He got out slowly, as if unsure of his welcome. I straightened, pulling off my gardening gloves. "Hello, Scott." "Hi, Mom." He looked different, thinner, less polished. The expensive watch he usually wore was absent from his wrist. "Your garden looks nice." "Thank you. Would you like to come in?" I was about to make some tea. Inside, we sat at the kitchen table, steam rising from our mugs, an awkward silence between us. Finally, Scott spoke. "I owe you an apology, Mom. A real one, not the kind I usually give." I waited, not making it easier for him, but not shutting him down either. "I've been taking you for granted for years," he continued. "Using you, not seeing you as a person with your own life, your own needs." He looked down at his hands. "Tiffany and I have been doing a lot of talking, a lot of reconsidering how we've been living, and I'm ashamed of how I've treated you." The words sounded genuine, free from the manipulative undertone I'd grown accustomed to detecting in his apologies. What brought this on? I asked. Necessity at first, he admitted. When you stopped the financial support, we had to make changes. Difficult ones. But once we started being honest about our finances, other truths started coming out too. He met my eyes. Haley confronted us after her last visit with you, asked us why we treat you the way we do, said she was ashamed of us. I felt a surge of pride in my granddaughter's courage, mixed with concern that she'd put herself in that position. I hope you didn't blame her for my decisions, I said carefully. No, Scott shook his head. She just held up a mirror, made us see ourselves from the outside. He paused. It wasn't a flattering reflection. I nodded, sipping my tea, letting him continue. I don't expect things to go back to how they were, he said. I know I've broken your trust, but I'd like to try to build something better. If you're willing, something real. I considered his words, searching his face for signs of the old manipulation. I didn't see it, but I remained cautious. What would that look like to you? He seemed surprised by the question. I, I'm not sure, exactly. I guess it would start with honest communication. No hidden agendas. No financial expectations. He hesitated. Maybe just getting to know each other again, as we are now. It was a reasonable approach, one that acknowledged the damage done without making unrealistic promises of instant repair. I'd be open to that, I said finally. Slow steps, real conversations, no pretending. Relief washed over his face. Thank you. That's more than I deserve. It's not about deserving, Scott. It's about choosing a different path forward. We talked for another hour, not about finances or the past, but about his work, my new activities, books we'd read, thoughts we'd had. It wasn't deep or particularly revelatory, but it was genuine in a way our interactions hadn't been in years. When he left, promising to call the following week, I felt cautiously optimistic. That night, I wrote in my journal, reflecting on the day's unexpected development. I had set boundaries, not to punish Scott, but to respect myself. Yet those same boundaries seemed to have created the possibility for something healthier between us. It was too soon to know if the changes would last, if Scott and Tiffany's newfound self-awareness would endure beyond the immediate financial pressure. But it was a beginning. As autumn deepened toward winter, I continued to build my own life while leaving space for these tentative new connections with my family. Haley visited regularly. Scott called weekly, our conversations gradually becoming more comfortable, more genuine. Tiffany invited me to lunch, just the two of us, and we had what might have been our first honest conversation in 15 years of knowing each other. At Thanksgiving, I declined their invitation to join them, choosing instead to host a small gathering with my new friends. It wasn't rejection. It was simply honoring my own needs and preferences rather than automatically accommodating theirs. To my surprise, they understood or at least accepted my decision without drama. The week before Christmas, I invited them all, Scott, Tiffany, Austin, and Haley, to my house for dinner. I prepared my mother's recipes, set the table with care, and welcomed them with genuine warmth. The evening wasn't perfect. Austin remained somewhat distant, and there were moments of tension when old patterns threatened to resurface. But there were also moments of real connection, of seeing and being seen. After dinner, as we sat in the living room with coffee and dessert, I brought out a small wrapped package for each of them. I've been thinking a lot about family heirlooms, I said, about what we pass down and why. I handed the first package to Haley. These things aren't valuable because of what they're worth, but because of the stories they carry, the connections they represent. Haley opened her package to find my mother's silver compact mirror, engraved with her initials. I remember this, she said softly. You used to let me play with it when I was little. My mother gave it to me when I turned 16, I told her. She said it was to remind me to always see myself clearly, not as others might wish to see me. I squeezed her hand. It seemed right for you. For Austin, I had chosen my father's pocket watch, not the most valuable piece I owned, but one with character and history. Your great-grandfather carried this through 2 wars, I told him. It reminded him that even in the darkest times, life continues to move forward. Austin seemed genuinely touched, turning the watch over in his hands with newfound respect. To Tiffany, I gave a delicate silver bracelet that had belonged to my grandmother. She was a remarkable woman, I said. Strong, independent, ahead of her time. She built her own business in an era when women rarely did such things. Tiffany's eyes widened. I didn't know that. There's a lot we don't know about each other, I said gently. Perhaps that can change. Finally, I handed Scott a small box. Inside was my father's signet ring, the one item I knew he had always admired. Dad's ring, he said, voice thick with emotion. I remember him wearing this every day. He was a man of integrity, I said, looking directly at my son. Someone who valued substance over appearance, truth over convenience. I see those qualities in you too, when you allow them to show. Scott met my gaze, his eyes wet. Thank you, he whispered, for not giving up on me. Family is complicated, I said, looking around at all of them. It can be a source of deepest pain or greatest joy, often both at once. What matters is that we see each other clearly, not as we wish each other to be, but as we truly are, flawed, imperfect, but worthy of respect and genuine connection. As they prepared to leave later that evening, Haley hugged me tightly. This was the best Christmas dinner ever, Grandma. Thank you. You're welcome, sweetheart. But Christmas is still a week away. She smiled, her eyes twinkling. I know, but this felt like what Christmas is supposed to feel like, real and warm and honest. After they left, I sat by the Christmas tree, its lights glowing softly in the darkness. The house was quiet again, but the silence felt different now, not empty, but peaceful, rich with possibility. The future remained uncertain, as it always does. The new patterns in our family relationships were fragile, still forming. Trust, once broken, rebuilds slowly. But for the first time in years, I felt hopeful about what lay ahead. My journey wasn't about rejection or revenge, but about reclaiming my worth, insisting on being seen. In doing so, I had not only changed my relationship with my family, but transformed my relationship with myself. I was no longer invisible, not to them, and more importantly, not to me. Whatever happened next, I would face it as my full, authentic self, no longer a supporting character in someone else's story, but the protagonist of my. As the year drew to a close, I stood on my porch watching the first snow begin to fall, delicate flakes swirling in the glow of the street lamps, each one unique, each one catching the light in its own way before joining with others to transform the landscape. There was a lesson there, I thought, about individuality and connection, about standing alone while still being part of something larger, about finding beauty in change. I wrapped my sweater tighter around my shoulders, breathing in the cold, clean air. The past was behind me, not forgotten, but no longer defining my present. The future stretched ahead, full of possibilities I was only beginning to imagine, and the present, this moment, right now, was mine to savor, to inhabit fully, no longer invisible, no longer merely useful, simply, wonderfully present. And that, I realized, was the greatest gift of all.